Hey, y'all, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I'm glad you're with us. We're going to do a lot of fun things in the show today. You may have seen this already. Later on, we're going to have some fun. Dwan Mathis does something really impressive, shows off some incredible athleticism. Many of you actually sent this to me on Twitter because you know I love this kind of stuff. We'll have some fun with Dwan a little later on in the show. I'll explain why, once again, something I've gotten all panicked about when it comes to recruiting may not actually be all that much worth panicking about. We'll talk to that. Our buddy Mike Griffith is in Nashville getting ready for the SEC tournament. Georgia going to make a miraculous run and win the whole thing. Probably not, but nonetheless, Mike is on hand there. We'll talk to him about that. I'm going to begin the show, too, with this. A really odd stat involving former Georgia wide receiver Riley Ridley. This is kind of interesting, and I believe it gives Kirby Smart fodder to really hammer a message home. I'll explain that off the top. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I would not describe Georgia coach Kirby Smart as particularly shy, but he may be even more emboldened now than ever, or at least soon this may be the case, to really hammer home a message that I believe he feels really strongly about. Let me explain it this way. We are coming up on the NFL draft. Now, for most Georgia fans, the early attention, the excitement right now is about the upcoming spring practice. We're just a few days away from that beginning for real, and that's what Georgia fans are excited about. Pro Day will be kind of mixed in that. There's a little bit of interest in that. But then after that, you get the NFL draft. And while Georgia fans are obsessed over what's going to happen with spring practice, the football world in general is somewhat obsessed with the NFL draft. It's just one of the big sporting events of the spring. Everybody seems to get interested in that. Around here, though, for DawgNation Daily and around these parts, we tend to look at the draft not so much for which team so-and-so player is going to go play for, but it's more about what does the draft say about the current state of college football, and how can programs like Georgia, coaches like Smart, how can they use the draft to build the stature and bring in more elite recruits? We never stop thinking about recruiting around here. That's for the good or for the bad, just the way we are. And we talk about the NFL draft in relationship to what it could mean for the future of Georgia football. In fact, last year on the day of the draft, we had one of our buddies, friends of the program, Chase Goodbread, NFL.com, on the show. Chase is one of these guys that covers college football from a draft angle, so he knows both the college part of this, the pro part of this, and we were previewing some of the UGA guys and where they might be picked, but Chase made it very clear. When it comes to nights like Georgia had in 2017, or I should say the draft last year, when it put, after the 2017 season, when it put, guys like, Roquan Smith and Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel into the NFL, when it put Davin Bellamy and Lorenzo Carter there, populating a lot of rosters with former Dogs, Chase explained then, that is really good for programs. And that was true for Georgia in last year's NFL draft. It's going to be true for this year's NFL draft as well. In fact, here's how Chase Goodbread said it.
Today is as big a day for recruiting as the year in terms of being able to generate interest and respect from recruits. And the more of those type of guys you have, the easier it is to get more.
So Chase Goodbread hammers home what is kind of an obvious point. Recruits are paying attention to the NFL draft because who wouldn't, if you play football, want to make millions of dollars in the league, and who wouldn't want to be a part of a program that makes it a little easier to get into the NFL? And Georgia is building for itself the kind of brand that makes getting to the NFL a little easier. Some of these paths are conventional, and some of them maybe are a bit unconventional. And an example of the unconventional path into the first round of the NFL draft is what I want to talk about right now, because I thought that Dane Brugler, who I think works for The Athletic now, worked for CBS Sports for a while, he's one of these NFL draft analysts, he tweeted out a little blurb from something I guess that he had written about Georgia wide receiver Riley Ridley that I thought was really interesting. And this will be interesting for Ridley and his future in the NFL, but as we say around here, it'll also be really interesting to see how Georgia uses this, and I believe this is going to become, if this happens anyway, I think it's going to become pretty interesting fodder for Kirby Smart. Let me show you the tweet if you're watching on video. Bob Sturm is the one that retweets this, but it's the note comes from Dane Brugler writing, like I said, I believe it's from The Athletic now. I apologize for not knowing that. Brugler writes about Riley Ridley that he's attempting to be the first receiver drafted top 50 overall without a 600-yard-plus receiving season in college since Eddie Royal did that in 2008. And Royal was from Virginia Tech, I believe. So he's trying to be drafted top 50 without a 600-yard plus receiving season. That hasn't happened since 2008. And really, if you look at some of these mock drafts, not only could Ridley be taken in the top 50, which is the first round and part of the second round, I mean, some of these mock drafts have Ridley going in the first round of the NFL draft. There's really no shortage of mocks that have him at least in that conversation. If not the first 32 picks, like 33, 34, something like that. I mean, Riley Ridley is very much knocking on the door of being in the first round of the NFL draft, which is life-changing generational wealth for he and his family for a long time to come, and he would do that in the NFL without ever having a big statistical season at Georgia. Now, can you imagine for a moment how Kirby Smart would be able to spin that? For receivers who come to UGA wanting touches and wanting attention, wanting the limelight. Kirby Smart, if this indeed plays out with Ridley, if he goes top 50, it's a pretty good salary. If he goes in the first round, it's even bigger point to make. It's even better argument to make. You want this attention, you want to do things your way, but look at what doing things my way got for Riley Ridley. He was a team player. He blocked. He participated in the team concept. He didn't put himself above the team, and look how much money he's making now playing for so-and-so team, whatever team. He didn't get a lot of touches, didn't get a lot of yards at Georgia, but now he's making a bunch of money in the NFL draft. That would become a very big argument for Kirby Smart to make if he is indeed able to make it. I mean, think about how this would have impacted, let's say, Jaden Hazelwood's recruitment. I'm not going to try to in any way say that Ridley's draft position would have changed Hazelwood's mind. Hazelwood seemed pretty content on going to Oklahoma. And I do realize that Hazelwood's one of these names that some of you would wish I'd rather not bring up. Some people don't like talking about the ones that are no longer at Georgia. I totally get that. This is just a brief point to make. Let's go back to last October and listen to some of the ways in which Hazelwood talked about how he views the Georgia offense. Now, if you're dissatisfied with Hazelwood because he chose Oklahoma over Georgia, just hear this as the representation of what an elite receiver might possibly think when he looks in on UGA, and think about how Ridley's status in the draft might potentially change that. Here's Jaden Hazelwood.
Is the best way Georgia gets back in it with you is they open it up, they throw it more, and they...
Exactly. Because for me to go there, that's a major switch up from the offense. Me going to an offense like that will probably take a lot for me to learn. Like, because you got to learn, like, how to block somebody every play. I'm not used to that type of offense. You know, I'm a spread type of offense because that's what I run in high school.
You'd be fine with blocking and all those duties as long as they
because I block now.
You
know
do.
What I'm saying?
So, as long as they took more shots, I guess.
Yeah. Make it not just for the running backs. You know what I'm saying?
So you hear a lot there from Hazelwood. He says, listen, I got to go to Georgia. I got to learn how to block. You know, I'm a spread guy. Georgia's not a spread offense. It's a pro-style offense. He insinuates that the Georgia situation is kind of mostly just for the running backs. And I know for some people they don't like hearing Hazelwood say these things, especially given the fact that he ended up signing with Oklahoma as an in-state prospect from the state of Georgia. But when you hear Hazelwood give all those reasons why he might not like Georgia, imagine how the next generation of Jaden Hazelwood's mind could potentially be changed if Kirby Smart or Cortez Hankton can say, yeah, I get your objection, and yeah, I hear your concerns, but look at Riley Ridley. 500-something yards receiving in his final year at Georgia, drafted top 50 overall, potentially drafted in the first round. I think that changes a lot because Kirby Smart has been really steadfast on this. Kirby Smart, when he's been asked about wide receivers, has been very clear that he likes playing a lot of guys. He likes letting the defense dictate how he uses his wide receivers, and he's really happy with what he's kind of called a wide receiver approach by committee. In fact, if you go back to just before the SEC championship game, essentially at the conclusion of the regular portion of the 2018 season, when he was asked about his wide receivers going into that game against Alabama, he basically laid it out that way, that we use a lot of different guys, we ask them to do a lot of different things, and to the tune of Riley Ridley, that game plan may work out to NFL riches. Here's Kirby from December.
They've improved with each week. I think, every game's kind of had a different layout with different wideouts kind of being able to showcase their abilities. It doesn't happen by planning by us. It happens by what defenses do and kind of what we get dictated to us by the coverages and how they play us. But I think they developed, they played really hard. They've been a huge asset on special teams. I think 6 of those guys start on special teams and do all kinds of things to make our team better, and they've really bought into being a physical core unit, and that's what makes them different.
I think that is a really important piece of audio from Kirby Smart. What you hear from him there is he is very comfortable using receivers on special teams, even though the glamour guys may not like that quite as much. He is very comfortable using the word physical to describe wide receivers, even though from the lips of one 5-star receiver a moment ago, physical wasn't exactly the way that he wanted to be thought of himself. He is very comfortable saying, we let the defense dictate which receiver we use and how many touches we give those guys, and we're okay with it being a different guy every single week. Not every fan likes that. Not every high school receiver likes that. But Kirby Smart, who's known to be a little stubborn from time to time, he doesn't seem to want to change on that. And if Riley Ridley goes on to have really good success in terms of where he gets drafted, not to mention what Terry Gowan and McCole Hardman might be able to do, then Kirby Smart's going to have the ammunition he needs to say, my way works. This NFL draft, like a lot of these are for Georgia, could be a pretty strong statement about the future of the Georgia program, where Kirby Smart can say, you don't have to get a lot of touches. You don't have to get a lot of yards. You don't have to get a lot of accolades to one day get a lot of money in the NFL draft. My guess is that message from Kirby could be a message that's well received by a lot of future recruits. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you. Thanks for being with us live on video today. 10 a.m. DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev, and in podcast form, pretty much wherever you can find podcasts. That's going to be important later on, the podcast, as we get ready to give away another Road to Atlanta t-shirt. By the way, if you haven't seen these, let me just show this to the video audience. I apologize, radio and podcast, you can't see this, but here it is, the Road to Atlanta t-shirt. I think it's a really cool t-shirt. I think it's a really important idea that Georgia is trying to do more in 2019. The team has said that around here. We support that, and doing more means getting back to Atlanta, and it means taking down those folks from Alabama to the West in the SEC championship, maybe even getting back there for the Peach Bowl and being the number one seed in the college football playoff and have it all run through Atlanta on the way to a national championship. It's a lot of fun to think about, and we are certainly excited about doing our part to help solidify that message with our Road to Atlanta t-shirt giveaway. We'll do another one of these a little bit later on in our program. We'll also get Mike Griffith here in a minute, too. Now, I just talked for a few minutes off the top of the show why Riley Ridley not getting a ton of receiving yards, but potentially being drafted in the top 50 of the NFL draft could be a really good thing. I do have to admit, fair and balanced for a moment, that there is also a chance that there's another potential take on this of, well, if you got a first-round wide receiver, why didn't you use him more? I think that's a fair question. It may not ultimately be a criticism that sticks to Smart, but the inverse of that discussion, I think, is certainly a fair question, and we'll talk about that a little bit with our buddy Mike Griffith coming up in just a moment. Let me also say, as we go around the doghouse here, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, that once again, and this has become kind of a rite of passion around here with DawgNation Daily, once again, here as we head towards this 2019 recruiting cycle, something that I've chosen to get a little worked up about as we go around the doghouse, something that I've chosen to get a little concerned about, has turned out to not really be that big of a deal. 2018, it's what's wrong with Georgia recruiting. There's been all kinds of threads about that at the forum at forum.dawgnation.com. What's wrong with UGA recruiting? Why is the 2018 class off to such a slow start? You probably had some issues with the 2019 class as well, and it ends up being rock solid and as good as it could possibly be. Well, here we are in the 2020 cycle, and we talked to Jeff Sintel about this yesterday. You had Rakeem Jarrett, the 5-star wide receiver. He takes a visit to Tennessee. Shortly after that visit to Tennessee, he's like, commitment coming soon. And listen, I told this to Jeff yesterday. I got a little bit of respect for T. Martin. I think that Martin is a potentially very interesting name for Tennessee with its offensive recruiting staff. I think that's the kind of guy who's he's signed 5 stars before. If Jarrett takes that visit and then off on the heels of that visit says, commitment coming soon, even though Tennessee's not the only school thought to be in the mix for Jarrett's services, got a little bit of respect for that. And so I asked Jeff Sintel yesterday when he joined us in the program, hey, how worried should I be as a Georgia fan, a guy that likes Jarrett, wouldn't mind seeing Jarrett in red and black, that Jarrett goes to Tennessee and then and very quickly after that says, I'm about to commit coming soon. Well, Jeff did his part to talk me off the ledge yesterday, and here's what Jeff had to say.
These young men are not authors. They don't get paid to tweet for a living, of course, but perhaps Rakeem Jarrett is not talking about his own commitment, but perhaps another commitment. That's option A. Option B is, he's about to commit. He's taking a couple of trips to Tennessee that wowed him, taking a trip to Georgia as well that wowed him. Lots of schools are in the mix. He's always been a long-standing Ohio State type guy. And lots of folks thought he would eventually end up in Columbus. Number 3 could possibly mean none of the above, because also on social media, I'm sure you saw the initial tweet, but he also said, when a lot of folks said, well, you haven't visited Clemson, so there's no way you're going to Clemson. And then Rakeem Jarrett said that, well, there's no way I'm committing until I see Clemson.
So Jeff says, listen, who knows what Jarrett means when he says commitment coming soon? This may not even be a commitment to a school. It may be a commitment to an all-star game or something like that. It could also just mean just some sort of chatter. He referenced the fact that he later on says, I'm not committing anywhere until I visit Clemson. So there's kind of a lot to consider when it comes to Rakeem Jarrett right there. But maybe from a Georgia fan's perspective who might be concerned about this, too much too soon for Jarrett, it sounds like he's not done with Georgia, not by a long shot. In fact, here is what Jarrett recently tweeted about UGA on the heels of the conversation that I had with Jeff yesterday. Here's Rakeem Jarrett saying that he's actually got a visit to UGA coming up very soon. He says UGA next week. So once again, this is kind of a rite of passage, kind of a tradition around DawgNation Daily. We get a little worked up about some of these recruiting storylines, but looks like Jarrett, not only is he not going to commit until he gets a chance to visit Clemson, he's also coming back to see Georgia again, too. So maybe the definition of how soon Rakeem Jarrett, the 5-star wide receiver, is committing, maybe that definition is kind of up for grabs here at the moment. So nonetheless, I'd love to see Georgia get in the mix some more with Jarrett, and then this will be a fun storyline to watch as the 2020 cycle continues to unfold. Around the Doghouse here today is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And Engineered Solutions of Georgia does a lot of really important things for your house, whether it's foundation repair, basement waterproofing, crawl space encapsulation. They also offer a lifetime of support. So if you got a cracked foundation or a wet basement or a damp crawl space, make sure you have one of their qualified professional technicians come out to your home. They're the only foundation repair company the DawgNation would trust, because they're the only ones with a full-time engineer on staff. So make sure you give them a call. 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. You will love Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, later on, we've got a Road to Atlanta t-shirt to give away. We'll have a fun topic involving UGA 2019 quarterback signee Dwan Mathis. But for now, for more on the SEC tournament where Mike is located and everything else going on with Georgia football, let's talk to Mike Griffith right here on DawgNation Daily.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insight.
Mike is in Nashville. Georgia plays in the SEC tournament later on this evening. We'll talk about that in just a moment as Georgia tries to finish its 2019 season on a high note after some rough going in the SEC, including the home finale against Missouri last week, and probably not much better in Columbia against the Gamecocks either. Nonetheless, we'll talk some basketball with Mike in just a moment. Mike, if you don't mind, though, before that, can I bring you in on a topic I was discussing before you joined us today?
Sure.
So I was talking about Riley Ridley, and Dane Brugler is a draft analyst. He was pointing out that there's a chance that Ridley could be the first wide receiver since 2008 to be drafted in the top 50 without having at least a 600-yard receiving season in college. Obviously, Ridley was 500-something yards this past year for UGA. And the point that I made off the top is, for Kirby Smart, this becomes a really big message to send to recruits that if you come here, I can get you to the NFL and even maybe being drafted first round or certainly in the top 50 without getting a whole lot of touches. That validates the team concept. But, Mike, as I said a moment ago, there is also potentially another side of this coin that we at least ought to consider for a moment. Georgia's offense was really good but came short of winning the national championship. And if you have a first-round caliber wide receiver, some people are going to say, well, maybe you should have used him more and maybe you could have won a game that you lost had you found a way to prioritize a guy like Ridley more than Georgia did. Where would you come down on that conversation?
Well, I mean, Georgia runs a pro-style offense, and thus, Jake Fromm goes to the line and makes a pre-snap read, and, as much as those NFL scouts have identified Riley as a talented receiver, this might shock some people, but the defensive coordinators in the SEC probably know that too. So I would suggest that there's probably a good chance that Riley saw his share of shaded coverage, if not double coverage. And if I'm Jake Fromm and I do my pre-snap read and I realize that I have McCole Hardman in man coverage or maybe Isaac Nauta not being covered at all on a release, I'll probably do that instead of throw into double coverage, because Georgia felt confident in all their receivers out there. It wasn't like there was Riley Ridley was the Lone Ranger. It's not like he's the only guy that could catch a pass. I mean, Terry Godwin had some. I'd say Terry Godwin probably had the best hands out of all the receivers, frankly. If anybody's going to complain about not being used more, I'd have said Terry Godwin was the one underutilized. But nevertheless, he got off to a slow start with an injury. But the point being that coverages and down and distance dictates a lot of what Georgia does. And remember, Georgia runs a high percentage of run plays, more so than most teams. I mean, Kirby is going to keep it on the ground, and why wouldn't you when you've got an offensive line like that? As long as you can keep down and distance in your favor, you don't want to be facing the 3rd and 7 and 3rd and 8 Riley Ridley. You want to be facing the 3rd and 1 and 3rd and 2 and handing off to DeAndre Swift.
So you mentioned a lot of things there, and there's one thing that you didn't mention that I want to get your thoughts on. You mentioned Georgia running the ball a lot. It does. You mentioned the presence of McCole Hardman and Terry Godwin. That's also true. But the other thing that Georgia does, and to be honest with you, Mike, I don't watch other teams as closely as I watch Georgia, so I don't know how unique this makes Georgia, but I do know from watching Georgia week to week, Mike, as you're very well aware of, they run a bunch of receivers in and out of the game. Now, there's a positive to that. You keep people happy. You keep people feeling like they're part of the team. It's probably good for chemistry to have a lot of different guys playing. But the downside to that is, for the guys that you want to get touches for, you mentioned Godwin, I mentioned Ridley. We can also include McCole Hardman in this, and I guess probably even maybe more for J.J. Holloman as well. For the guys you want to get involved, when they're only on the field part of the time, they're not going to get as many touches, and they're not going to get as many stats. Do you think the way that Kirby substitutes as liberally as he does the wide receiver position, is that a good or a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing, especially if you're going to carry 14 receivers on scholarship. I mean, that's a high number. In Kirby, he gets the value out of those guys. A lot of programs won't use. Receivers are kind of wasted when they're not on the field playing receiver. Georgia, these guys play special teams. The Georgia receivers aren't like a lot of other receiving groups that, most of the time you say, well, what's a receiver going to do for you when he's not out there at receiver? I mean, you look around and you don't see a whole lot of receivers playing special teams like DBs do, like linebackers do, even like some reserve running backs do. It's kind of been looked at as the finesse position. But Kirby sees that as a potential winning edge, and that's why he stresses the blocking so much. And really, as much as NFL scouts like what Riley Ridley did as a receiver, they really like what he did as a blocker. I mean, he's a guy that'll knock you out of balance, and that's why Kirby really liked him. Now, I don't know if I think he's a first-round pick. I mean, his combine was, quite frankly, not very good at all. It was actually poor. Didn't seem explosive, didn't run fast, didn't have a good vertical, didn't have a good broad jump. But you turn the tape on, and Riley did some big things against great competition. You look what he did against Alabama, for example, and there's enough tape from those 2 Alabama games to get him drafted for sure. But I don't think it was like he was a Julio Jones talent or anything like that. I don't think he was that far and away better than the other receivers on the Georgia football team. I think Jake went to the line and made his pre-snap read, and the throw was predicated on what the defense was giving him.
You wrote a really interesting piece recently about the Georgia offensive line, and one of the names you highlighted there, amongst a lot of questions about this group this season, it's probably going to be a really impressive unit, but even impressive units have some questions to be answered, and Georgia's offensive line is no exception with that. You highlighted Ben Cleveland a bit. And, Mike, when I think about guys who first of all, I don't think we talk enough about how much it hurt Georgia at the end of the season not to have Ben Cleveland fully healthy. If we assume that he is fully healthy this season, this is still a guy from an age standpoint is pretty young. This is a guy that has shown that he's growing into that role as a really impressive offensive lineman. We use the word breakout star a lot this time of year. If we get a full year's worth of health from Ben Cleveland, I'm not quite so sure that this young man won't make quite a name for himself by the time it's all said and done. Probably as a guard, probably right there still on that right side. But that to me is a really interesting name to watch, and I think we'll all be reminded of how much Georgia missed him when he was not healthy at the end of last season.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I thought Cade Mays, stepped in and did about as well as you could ask a true freshman. Cade earned freshman All-American honors, in fact. But, you do wonder, how back has been. I know we saw a clip of him in the weight room, and, But you wonder about his running. I remember Charlie Warner telling us last year, Charlie suffered the same injury in the Rose Bowl. You talk about a guy that was really missed. Maybe if Charlie Warner doesn't suffer that broken leg in the Rose Bowl, maybe Georgia wins the national title. He was a big part of the game plan. But digress to Ben Cleveland, so June, July, the timeline, maybe Big Ben will be back all the way. And oh man, the competition there. I mean, there's a chance Cade Mays might not have a starting spot. And that to me is just amazing. Or Jamari Salyer. I mean, the talent and the depth of the Georgia offensive line is like none other I've ever seen. And that's good news, because you look at that Georgia line, BA, and, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news here, but 4 out of those 5 guys could be going pro. I do think Andrew Thomas will go pro, the left tackle. If he has a good year, I think he's gone. I wonder about Solomon Kinley. I mean, that guy's 6'6", 335, and he can really move. He's draft eligible. Big Ben, this will be his 3rd season now. He's another guy that could leave, as well as Isaiah Wilson. So it's good that Georgia has the depth. It's a good problem to have guys that have that sort of potential and talent that they could consider the NFL after just 3 years. But getting back to Ben Cleveland, I would agree. I thought he was their best run blocker early on last season. I think they did miss him a great deal. I thought that Pittman did an outstanding job juggling those guys around. I think Isaiah was the only one that didn't miss snaps on account of injury. I know Solomon, I think, started every game, but I believe he missed part of a game. He was knocked out of part of a game with an injury. So that depth is invaluable. I believe that depth on the offensive line is what the key to the national championship season would be.
Can I put the cart way before the horse on something just for a minute? You mentioned the fact that Cleveland will be going into a redshirt junior year. He could obviously choose to leave after this season if he wanted to. Some players in his position might. I'm wondering, though, given the fact that, Cleveland is, kind of a young guy from an age standpoint, I'm wondering if sticking around for another year, kicking out to tackle, because I think you're right. I think one way or another Andrew Thomas is probably gone after this season. I think he'll be a very high first-round draft pick next year. Isaiah Wilson, just given his size and the way that he's grown into his body pretty quickly, he could be as well. I am already thinking a little bit about the situation for Georgia at offensive tackle in 2020. I think Cade Mays is a part of that. And I'm thinking that Ben Cleveland kind of going back eventually to the position we all thought he was going to play to begin with. I'm wondering if that couldn't be a big story for 2020, and Cleveland ends up making a big name for himself from a draft standpoint by being a tackle in his final year for Georgia 2020. Obviously, I don't want to get rid of 2019 yet. The season hasn't even started yet. But I am thinking a little bit about the role that Cleveland could potentially play for Georgia in 2020 were he to choose to stick around.
Yeah, well, that's a risk-reward situation for Ben and his family. He's already suffered a broken leg and missed most of one season, so he's certainly aware that there would be a risk in returning. And, there would be a value, as you said, if he could prove he could play offensive tackle. Theoretically, offensive tackles are valued more than offensive guards, but that's a long way off. That's a situation for Ben and his family to decide. I know, I think Kirby was caught a little off guard by McCole Hardman going pro. Just talking to McCole a little bit at the combine, and the way he phrased it. I don't think I ever used the quote, but I asked him, "When did you tell Kirby?" And he said, "Well, it was something he thought about mid-season." He said, but he didn't tell Coach Smart until after the bowl game. He said, and that's when it hit the fan. So I don't know what hit the fan, but my guess is Kirby probably wasn't ready for that or expecting that necessarily. Not that he's objecting to it, but from a planning standpoint, Kirby brought up a great point, and this is an issue for college football. They've really, one of the unintended consequences of this early signing day, and none of us really knew how it would work out. We didn't know necessarily that the landslide of talent would go early, but that's what's happened. But because the declaration date for the NFL draft isn't until January 14th, a lot of coaches in that early signing day, they don't really know what they're losing yet. And I guess what I'm suggesting here, BA, is when early signing day rolled around on, December 19, December 20, I don't know that Kirby knew he was losing McCole Hardman. And so that may have affected, the takes and non-takes for that early signing class. And by the time you find out that McCole is going pro, it may be too late. One of those other receivers, maybe he didn't know that McCole was going pro, and maybe had he known that McCole Hardman was going pro by early signing day, maybe he's a Georgia Bulldog right now. And, so those dates aren't congruent, and it really puts the coaches and the programs in a pickle. That and the early signing day rolls around, they still don't know who's going pro. And I do think that played a role, and I think it hurt Georgia recruiting this year. And I don't think Kirby necessarily expected McCole Hardman to be going pro.
Talked earlier in the week about the Adam Rittenberg report from ESPN that Jake Fromm was part of some guys at the scouting combine. He seemingly is being treated by the NCAA as a guy that very easily could leave Georgia after the 2019 season to go pro. We talked to Trent Dilfer, the quarterback guru, back in early February. He says that he thinks Fromm still has some things to work on. Mike, you see Fromm up close during practice every single day. You'll see him a lot starting this spring. From your perspective, how realistic, how likely is it that 2019 is Fromm's last year at Georgia?
I think it's 50-50. I think that, this is a decision for, again, Jake and his family and the agent. Because as much as anything at that position, what you've got to weigh is the other talent in the class. Are you the number 3 quarterback coming out in 2020 and the number 1 quarterback in 2021? Or are you the number 3 quarterback coming out in 2020, but the number 5 coming out in 2021? So you've really got to look at the landscape. You got to look at the other quarterbacks in the class. I can't speak to the financial considerations for the Fromm family. I can't speak to where Jake's at in terms of his college experience and what he, how he feels about his legacy. Obviously, the most famous guy to come back for a senior year was Peyton Manning at Tennessee. Probably could have been number 1 the year before, but Peyton Manning didn't have any financial considerations, and quite frankly, I think he wanted to win the Heisman Trophy. I don't know what Jake's motivated by. I don't know does he like college? Does he like getting up and going to class? Because the one thing that people don't take into consideration, yes, you're around your friends, and yes, the college lifestyle is something you can only do once and you should enjoy. But I can tell you that at Georgia, from an academic standpoint, it is demanding and it is exhaustive. And I look at what these student athletes go through and how little of a social life they have and how little time they have. And listen, I'm not going to tell you, but it's a different life, and it's a difficult one. And if your dream has been to play in the NFL, and that's within your grasp, I can certainly see the temptation. So I think Jake could have the ability to come out early, but as to whether he does or not, there's so many factors, and I think chief among them is what does the quarterback class look like as far as the business decision he would be making, and then how does Jake Fromm feel about signing autographs at every turn in Athens and getting up for workouts at 5 a.m. and going to class all day, and weighing that versus the professional lifestyle.
Let me finish up with this really quickly. Mike, I'm a Georgia fan. I'm a Georgia basketball fan. Yet with that said, I was really turned off by the performance last week from this team in Athens and its home finale, senior night, really not showing up and showing very little effort whatsoever against Missouri. They get a chance for a rematch tonight, but why should Dog fans be excited about this given how little this team seems to be putting forth the effort, at least based on everything since the Florida game?
Yeah, it was tough. They had their 2 worst shooting games, the last 2 games of the season, and they got out-rebounded by Missouri 50-28. There's 6 seniors here, and I suppose if I were going to appeal to the Georgia fans, and I would say, what, these guys never lost to Georgia Tech. That's something that you can take with you. These seniors never lost to Georgia Tech. These seniors, they never embarrassed the program in off-court incidents. I'm not aware of any violence, anybody hitting anybody innocently in Athens, anybody doing anything that would bring embarrassment to the program. These seniors had opportunities to go other places. They chose Georgia, and these seniors stuck with the program when their head coach left. Things haven't gone like they would like, obviously, and Georgia is not a place that I would ever suggest should accept losing in any sport with the facilities and the academics and the incredible town of Athens that it has to offer. There's no reason why Georgia shouldn't be one of the top all-around sports programs in the country. And, by the way, it is. Greg McGarrity's done a very nice job with that. But all that said, we know results are the bottom bottom line, I know this, BA. I know this, and I've said this. When you cover a team, you learn to respect individuals, and you look for storylines. I wouldn't say you're a fan of the team, but I've watched this Georgia team play LSU within one possession, play Mississippi State within one possession, play Ole Miss within one possession, play Auburn within one possession, beat Texas by 10 points, beat Georgia Tech, win at Florida. I've seen enough out of these guys that I hope for their sake that they can get a win at the SEC tournament.
Right.
I hope that they can leave on a positive note and get one win and give themselves a chance to play Auburn, because they played Auburn pretty tough.
It should certainly be interesting to see, Mike. We certainly appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us. We'll enjoy your coverage from Nashville, the SEC tournament. We'll look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff there from Mike Griffith. A couple points that he makes that I want to follow up on. I actually think that his thing about Fromm and the 50-50 is probably a pretty good split. I think there's about a half a chance that he goes out there and does everything he needs to do, and it becomes this what do you call it, fait accompli. Just becomes this obvious situation where he has to go be a first-round pick, because if you're going to be one, I think you got to do that. It's just too much of a life-changing experience not to. But there's also a chance, and you can hear some of the stuff that Dilfer said about Fromm in terms of what he needs to do, where either there's unfinished business on the part of the team, unfinished business for Fromm, where coming back the final year makes the most sense. If you look at the quarterback depth, I know Connor Riley wrote about this at DawgNation.com this morning. If you look at the quarterback depth, I believe it's set up right now with the thoughts that Fromm will be here all 4 years. So maybe that's the plan that's in place, and it kind of falls into that at a certain point in time. But it's a coin flip. It could happen, could not. I think it's important to remember, though, how much the people outside the bubble of DawgNation are treating Fromm as if he could very easily be a first-round pick in 2020. So that's worth paying attention to. The other thing that Mike said that I kind of jotted down, and I want to make a point out of, that, and obviously I talk about wide receivers a lot. I think that's a big-time missing piece for Georgia in its pursuit of a national championship. Mike, on Kirby's use of the wide receivers, he says that Kirby's getting value out of these guys, and that is true. Value out of a lot of different wide receivers. We talked about that off the top of the program, and how Riley Ridley fits into the overall committee for Georgia wide receiver, and how he may, even being ill-used, lightly used at times, go on to be a top 50 pick in the NFL draft. The one thing I will say, though, moving forward, I think the challenge for Kirby Smart is not to get some value out of a lot of guys, but take a big, long list of potential receivers and turn somebody into a great one. And in 2019, that's the difference in a national championship to me. It's a Demetrius Robertson. It's a freshman like George Pickens doing what Justin Ross did for Clemson a year ago, what Jerry Jeudy did a bit for Alabama in 2017. It's taking one of those guys and saying, we're going to make you more than just a good receiver. We're going to make you a difference-making player that blows the top off of defense. I think it's really important. We've got a 5-year track record of college football playoffs to look at. No team has ever won the national championship without having at least one receiver gain 900 or more yards through the air. That is seemingly a line of demarcation separating the great teams from the not quite as great teams, and Georgia's going to do that in 2019. Yesterday on our program, we talked a decent amount about our actually, before we do that, let me remind you about a really cool thing coming up at Kroger. Let me not forget about this. Kroger's got a big thing coming up for St. Patrick's Day. It's kind of a fun holiday. Many of you love that. Some of you like going out and being a part of that. Some of you like being at home and having that great, authentic St. Patrick's Day meal. Well, listen, Kroger's got that for you. Corned beef brisket, cabbage, potatoes, all that stuff. Great savings and opportunities to make the perfect St. Patrick's Day dinner, so please check that out. Here's a website you can go to, Kroger.com/what'sfordinner. Kroger.com/what'sfordinner, and you can find out how you can make this year's St. Patrick's Day even more fun with our friends at your local Atlanta Kroger. Now, with that said, let me talk about the over-under stuff. You know, yesterday I talked about Georgia. Bet Online, where the online sports books put out its over-unders. Georgia at 10.5. I explained briefly yesterday how even though there's seemingly a bit of a gap between Georgia and Alabama. Alabama said 11, Georgia said at 10.5. If you look at the so-called juice, the vigorish that the sportsbook adds, the difference between Georgia and Alabama is actually not that great. That's probably more information than many of you care about. But nonetheless, since I mentioned Georgia yesterday with its season win total set at 10.5, I thought it might be worth mentioning a few of the other SEC teams here for a moment. As I said before, Alabama is set at 11. If you force me to make this bet, over or under regular season wins for Alabama, because that's what this is, regular season wins, over or under, going under. Now, you can sort of see the money leaping out of my wallet as I say that. I'm even getting laughed at on the other side of the glass for this. I know this seems like it ought to be an easy bet for the over, given how weak as water Alabama's non-conference schedule is. They play Duke to open the season, then it's directional schools in every other non-conference game. The SEC West is tougher this year, though. It's tougher than it's been in a while. Auburn on the road, no pushover. LSU, I think pretty good. Texas A&M, I think pretty good. I think there's a chance that Alabama gets a loss out of that group, and then you just need one more crazy thing to happen for you. I might go under Alabama at 11. Many of you will say that's wishful thinking. You may very well be right. LSU at 9, according to Bet Online, I'd probably go over on that. I'm actually fairly high on LSU. I like the freshman running backs. I wish one of them was at Georgia, to be sure. I think the wide receiver core is pretty deep. I think they're actually going to do a pretty good job of replacing what they lost defensively. Grant Delpit's a candidate for national awards. I like LSU over the 9. I'll go Florida under the 9 for obvious reasons. I'll go Mississippi State under 8. That's one of the numbers that's out there. I'll go under on Mississippi State just because I think they get caught up in the depth that is the SEC West. Auburn at 8 seems like a really good number. Once again, if you put a gun to my head and force me to take this, I'll take Auburn over 8. I got Auburn finishing the year in the top 25, or at least in the top 25 when it plays Georgia in November. How about that much at least? And if that's the case, you probably got to go over on that. Another really good number is Tennessee at 7. Tennessee at 7 feels about right to me. That feels about right. But if you force me to go over or under, given the fact they play Alabama, the East is a little bit better, I'm going to go under Tennessee and say the Jeremy Pruitt era hasn't quite gotten off to that hot of a start. I'll go under on Tennessee. We'll do a million more things with this over the course of time, but that's some early thoughts on some of these 2019 SEC teams. We'll make that your SEC through. Okay, so here for a moment on DawgNation Daily, before we give away our Road to Atlanta t-shirt, let me apologize for doing something that's kind of video only, radio audience, podcast audience. We don't mean to make you feel left out, but you can go, I tell you what, if you don't know what we're about to show, go to DawgNation.com. Our buddy Michael Carvel has linked this video on DawgNation.com. It should be easy to find. So go to the website, the world-famous DawgNation.com. You can see this. A lot of you sent this to me. You know I love football players dunking a basketball. Pretty impressive athleticism from D'Wan Mathis, the 2019 quarterback signee, who says he's inviting all would-be blockers to meet him at the rim. And by blockers, I mean shot blockers, not offensive line blockers. And he's going to throw this down. I think that Mathis is a really athletic guy. I'm not quite sure yet how that translates to future quarterback at Georgia in the SEC. But that dunk, the other stuff we've seen from him in the football field, there is no doubt that that Mathis is he's a really impressive athlete. And on G-Day, that's going to be one of the things probably worth watching, worth paying attention to, is how that athleticism transfers early on to him competing to be the backup quarterback at Georgia. One thing we know about Mathis is, in addition to that really good athleticism, he has also got a really good head on his shoulders. This is not a kid coming in with outsized ego, inflated sense of his self-worth. He, despite the fact that he is a tremendous athlete, is coming to Georgia to learn and hopefully gain a little bit of the insight that Jake Fromm has used over the last couple of seasons. He told this to our buddy Mike Griffith back right after he signed at Georgia. I love this line from D'Wan Mathis.
Really, I'm just coming in to work and put my head down and do what I'm supposed to do. I'm not coming in to – of course I'm going to compete, but I'm not coming in to just try to push Jake Fromm out the way and take his job, because, of course, the chances of that happening are very low. He as soon as he came in, he went straight to the national championship and played for a national championship. A game that a lot of people thought they were going to win to the very end, came down to the last wire. But really, when I come in, I'm just coming in to work hard and do what I'm supposed to do and learn what I can from Jake Fromm and see where that can take me.
Now, what's even better from Mathis is you hear the humility, the perspective, the maturity. But that doesn't mean he's lacking in confidence. Someone that can do what we just saw Mathis doing, dunking that way, running the way that he does on a football field. He ought to have confidence in his own abilities, his own skill set, his own athleticism, and Mathis clearly does.
Really just my ability to make plays. I mean, outside, the play could break down. And with me just having my ability and my God-given talents, man, God just blessed me with some different kind of stuff that I can do outside of the pocket. I can make any throw. I can throw any ball, and that's just the biggest thing.
So listen, I love that combination of I believe in my own abilities, and yet I'm also coming to Georgia to learn. And the more you see examples of him on a football field, and we've shown you his highlights a million times, the dunk, which is mostly fun, but still, I mean, you got to be a pretty good athlete to jump up that high. I'm not quite sure how vertical leap helps you at the quarterback position, but it can't hurt to be that kind of athlete. Pretty impressive stuff when it comes to Dwan Mathis, and that should be pretty fun to see starting this spring. That Stetson Bennett versus Dwan Mathis competition, that's going to be kind of a fun one. And, Georgia finding a stopgap backup quarterback in case Jake Fromm has to leave a game for a brief moment. That's an important question for Georgia this upcoming season. All right, we have come to the time of the show today where I need to give away my Road to Atlanta t-shirt. Congratulations goes out to our winner for today, Marcus Bradshaw. Marcus sent an email to us yesterday showing him subscribe to our podcast on the Apple Podcast player. Marcus, we really appreciate that. Your Road to Atlanta t-shirt will be on the way soon. And as we wrap up today on the show, let me also tell you how you can be a winner for the Road to Atlanta t-shirt tomorrow. We're going to kind of make this as, open for everybody as possible. Not everybody has, the different platforms, so we're trying to move around and make this an easy opportunity for everybody. Once again, like we did a few days ago, I will send out a link to the podcast on Twitter today, at DawgNation Daily on Twitter. Simply find at DawgNation Daily on Twitter. When I tweet out today's show in podcast form, please do me a favor, retweet that. It helps other people who don't know about our show find the show. That's a big boost to us. And as a way of saying thank you for that, I'll take all the retweets from that today. I'll put them in a pot. I'll draw a name out, and we'll announce another Road to Atlanta t-shirt giveaway tomorrow. So good stuff on that. Let me also say, lousy, stinking Gators. Around here, we don't like them. And it's been 865 days since that bunch has beaten Georgia. It's our Gator Hater Updater. That's good news. We'll see you tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily. And on video. As we get ready to transition now, get a little heated up on the show every single day. That means there's no better choice right now than to cool down with the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. A chance to get relaxed and settle in and have some comments, and we'll have a nice little bucket of time to get a good many comments going here. We appreciate you being a part of it. We appreciate R.S. Andrews bringing it to you as well. R.S. Andrews, they do heating, air, plumbing, electrical. They're the ones that we trust to kind of play all the positions when you have things going on at your home, stuff you got to have fixed. R.S. Andrews does a great job of getting everything back up in working order. And what's really good is when it comes to some of this kind of stuff, who really knows how much any of this kind of stuff costs until you talk to a company like R.S. Andrews? You're not really sure. But some companies, fly-by-night organizations, things like that, sometimes you get surprises, and it's never a pleasant surprise. With R.S. Andrews, that is not the case. They're going to do the work they promise at the price you talked about. You're going to feel good about letting them into your house. It's rsandrews.com on the web. You're going to really like our friends Dari and the whole crew over at R.S. Andrews, so please make sure you check them out. And huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for bringing the R.S. Andrews Cool Down to us here on DawgNation Daily. With that said, let's go ahead and get ready to do some comments. Hayes Calloway says, I'm going crazy without Georgia football. Well, the good news on that, Hayes, is we're not that far away from something that at least feels a little bit like Georgia football, and that's spring football. Now, we'll all admit spring football is not quite the same thing as what you get September, October, November, but it's as close as we're going to get. From that standpoint, it's not so bad. Nick Lurch says, I have a question. I missed some show due to illness. What is the house next to Eddie? All right, great question. So we had a tremendous DawgNation Daily viewer who had reached out to me and wanted to send this to me. His name's Jack, lives down in South Georgia, and he'd wanted to send one of these to me. Really nice email about that. And I was just really flattered that he'd want to do this. First of all, a friend of his named James Corsi, made this. First of all, it's very hard to make, as you might imagine, but imagine the difficulty of shipping this to DawgNation World Headquarters. So the family went to a lot of trouble to get this to me, and I was really, really honored they'd want to send that to me. And so I'm very proud to display this on our desk here. It also says 2017 SEC champions on it. This may be one of those things that over the years we may have to, as Georgia wins more of these championships, put more of these birdhouses out here. Pretty soon it's going to look like one of those suburban subdivisions where you just got houses of all the championships we hope to see Georgia win. So this was a very nice gift sent to me by a terrific DawgNation daily viewer. And I said, I've gotten some other gifts along the way. I may put some more of these kind of out here and just as a way of saying thank you to the folks who've sent those in or who've given me things because it's kind of a cool thing. Ricky Jet says, it's nice that Jack sent you the house, but does that make him a top fan? And that's always still controversial on Facebook with the top fan status that some people do have and some people don't. Phil Rogers says, BA, could Georgia go 4 wide receivers with the wide receivers we have in our offense? I guess that's a possibility and something that Georgia probably will explore some. They've, I think, will certainly do that. I think the one thing that Georgia does not want to do, though, is go too many plays without having that 4th pass-catching option be a tight end. And I tell you who has said some interesting things about this in the past. You guys remember Jim Mora Jr., who used to be the UCLA coach. It was Falcons coach a long time ago, and now he's an analyst. But back when he was still at UCLA, he kind of said something that was kind of interesting, and it kind of caught some people off guard at first. I think it was more true than not. He talked about how, in his mind, spread teams, so to speak, don't win the national championship. Now, in this day and age, even Georgia runs some spread. Alabama probably ran, when it won the national championship most recently, more spread than not. Clemson's kind of a spread team. And so what Morris said at the time generated a lot of controversy and a lot of debate amongst the really, really obsessive college football fans about how true what Morris said really was. And some other smart people had kind of distilled Morris' comments down to this, that there's, a couple different versions of the spread, and the one thing that the better spread teams, the national championship level teams, seem to have in common is that 4th receiving option is a tight end. Use Oklahoma as a for instance on this. When Georgia played Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl, no one would deny that Oklahoma was a spread team. That's kind of just what their cachet was. But I forget his name. But Oklahoma had a really good tight end on that roster. That number 4 receiving option was a tight end. And tight ends have value for a lot of reasons. Defenses have a lot to think about when a tight end's on the field. So I think when you're trying to win a national championship, going away from that 4th receiver being a tight end, I think that's getting away from what really works the best. The teams that don't have those tight ends, the Texas Techs of the world and the, pick any one of those like really, really Big 12-y style spread teams. The teams that are getting away from that, I think, are getting farther away from what really works. I think for Georgia, having an athletic tight end, that's why 2020 tight end recruitment is going to be so interesting. Whether it be the kid from Las Vegas or Reed Gilbert, having that tight end that can also function as a wide receiver, that's going to be important. And Charlie Warner can do a little bit of that for Georgia right now. In fact, if you go back and look at some of the 2018 games, you may still have them on your DVR. They're fairly easy to find online. Look at how many times that Isaac Nada, obviously a tight end, is going to play tight end in the NFL. Look at how often Nada would step away from the tackle box and actually become himself almost like a wide receiver. So Georgia, I think, values the ability to be multiple and versatile and show a lot of different formations. But I do think that tight ends are going to remain valuable in the Georgia offense, and I think that's a good thing. James Hightower says, I've seen comments from some top fans on this thread that just have no clue. So James says not all top fans are what they're cracked up to be. For sure. Alan McGurk says, what's the over-under on when UGA beats Florida? They take Mullen's media time away. Yeah, listen, I think that Dan Mullen may have ran some mouth this year that may get himself in a little bit of trouble. Richard Sheffield, good take. He says, top fan status works like the celebrity college admission scandal. I just need BA to help me with my SATs. I think I'm the last one you probably want to help you with your SATs, unfortunately. Chad Williams says he's going to enter the transfer portal to see if he can be a top fan. For sure. Let me go over here to YouTube and get a few of the YouTube comments. RT367 says, hey, we have elite fans on YouTube. And that's a pretty good take. Pro King 123 says the YouTube crowd's the smart ones. for sure. Brian Kephart says, I've watched 2 of our games just recently, he says, and yeah, I'm ready for some Georgia football, and I know that. C. Hill says, B.A., who do you think has the most impact coming in, George Pickens or Dominic Blaylock? Well, there's obviously an assumption you're going to operate on that Blaylock's going to be academically eligible. As we said before, we're not going to dig in too deep on that grade situation because we think he deserves a measure of privacy as he works through that, but we also can't pretend that issue doesn't exist. It's a hot topic on every message board and has been now for months. So if we assume that Pickens, the grade situation is all cleared up, I think athletically, I'm really tempted to say George Pickens just because I like what he brings to the table. I think the one thing, though, when you watch Blaylock's highlights, what you see from him is a level of performance that's even greater than the athletic specs suggest they should be. Because Blaylock, after all, lost his 5th star. And for a lot of Georgia fans, there's this confusion of, and I have to admit I'm kind of in this group too. Hold on now. How did he lose his 5th star? We show the highlights of him all the time. Every single one of his touchdowns is, to me, about as dazzling as they can be. He had 3 total touchdowns in the All-American Bowl. What about Blaylock's senior year makes him less of a recruit than he once was? I'll admit I'm as confused by that as anybody is. So I think it's only safe to say that what you see from Blaylock in games is greater than what he measures when he goes to these, glorified combine type events, I guess. And yet, I still like Pickens' athleticism. I really do. When a guy like Ben Wolk, for instance, our buddy that covers Auburn recruiting, when he comes on here and says that Pickens is the best high school player he's seen ever, that matters to me. So I think that Georgia's really lucky to have both of them. And I think over the course of years, I think they'll both have plenty of opportunities to make big plays. But I have to say that if you're looking for that immediate impact as a freshman, there's some things that Pickens brings to the table that makes him very capable of doing that. Brian McPhail asks a good question. He says, which dog will be drafted first and second? Well, there's no doubt that DeAndre Baker's drafted first. Connor's busy right now, so he can't talk. But is it a foregone conclusion that Riley Ridley's the second dog taken? Who else would that be? Connor Riley's going to join us. He follows the draft probably more closely.
Mecole Hardman has been sort of similarly placed in that.
Do you think Hardman will be drafted ahead of Ridley, or do you think he could be?
I think there's a pretty decent chance, especially because Ridley didn't run very well. And he was testing well was never going to be his thing, but I think a team could talk themselves into Hardman, especially continue to grow as a wide receiver, whereas Ridley is closer to a finished product.
So there's a famous writer, his name's Wright Thompson, wrote a long piece about the NFL scouting combine last week for ESPN. It's pretty entertaining. He made the point, though, that NFL teams aren't using this combine as much as people think they are. And he even got some quotes from some people like, I don't even know why I'm here. That this is kind of growing as an industrial complex. It's on TV. It's going to be on ABC, I think, next year. It's insane how much it's growing, but according to a lot of people who cover this stuff, the NFL teams aren't really using the combine as a differentiator with draft picks as much. That's what the writer of this piece said. So given that, I would say that Ridley at Georgia proved himself to be a little more sure-handed than Hardman did, even if he proved himself to be much slower than Hardman at the combine. Are you really going to – and there's no wrong answer here. Are you really going to take Hardman over Ridley just because he's that much faster?
Well, it's not just because he's faster. I think it's because Hardman also has a lot more upside, I feel like.
As a kick returner?
As a kick returner and as a wide receiver, as an offensive weapon. I mean, you see how Tyreek Hill is being used in Kansas City. It's not far-fetched to think an NFL team can try and do something similar with Hardman. And we saw glimpses of that from Hardman this year in the South Carolina game and the Alabama game in the national championship game. Plus, the NFL draft and drafts in general, it's more, upside is something that is more attractive to teams. Riley Ridley is a pretty finished product as far as what he's going to be at the next level. Whereas, Hardman, as we've talked about before, he's someone who only started playing wide receiver full-time as a sophomore. So he does have the potential to continue to grow.
Do NFL teams want to teach? How much do NFL teams want to teach, though? Do they want to teach him to play wide receiver?
DK Metcalf, can't run routes, and he's going to be a first-round pick.
He also can't run three-cone drills either, apparently.
That goes to the point about not being able to run routes.
So if and I don't feel that strongly about this. I'm only arguing this just for the fun of it. if I'm going to be Ridley's agent, I'm taking the 2017 national championship game, and that's my game film. I'm saying, here he is against a bunch of pros from Alabama. He's getting catches all over the place. Is there a Hardman game that you're going to say, here's the tape I'm showing for Hardman for what he showed in a college game? And I'm not saying there's not. I'm just saying I feel like for Ridley, he's got that 2017 national championship where he really looked pretty good.
I would say Hardman looked as good, if not better, in that national championship game.
Okay.
And
he did run that sideline route where he just blew past people.
And
no doubt about that.
I would also include this year's South Carolina game as well.
Okay, one more on this topic, and then we'll move on and get some more comments, and we'll let. Do you think it's if Ridley gets drafted in the top 50? Go back to the topic off the top of the show. If Ridley's drafted in the top 50 without ever getting 600 yards receiving at Georgia, is that a good thing for Kirby Smart, where he gets to say, I can put guys in the league without using him in college? Or is it a bad thing for Georgia that did stop short of winning a national championship that it had, and at least from an NFL draft standpoint, elite level receiver, and just didn't use him very much? I mean, which side of that coin would you fall on more?
I tend to fall on the bad side because it looks like they're not optimizing the most out of the talent on their roster. Like, it's pretty clear that the NFL values Riley Ridley's skill set more than Georgia and his time at.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be one thing. I mean, listen, I think Kirby Smart's going to use it as a good thing one way or another, but in terms of how Georgia fans should view this, it'd be one thing if Georgia had won the last two national championships not using its first-round level wide receivers, but the fact that in a couple of these games, Georgia was a couple yards, couple plays, couple points short, to think that you had, and if you want to include Connor's take on Hardman, two top 50 level receivers, and neither one of them eclipsed 600 yards receiving. You'd probably like to do a little bit more than that. Probably like to do more than that.
You know, yes, Georgia is a great offensive line, great running, and great rushing attack, but Jake Fromm's a pretty good quarterback as well. So I think that only sort of further adds questions where you had all this wide receiver talent, and you left a little bit to be desired.
That's the best way to say it. It's not an obvious criticism, but it is a curiosity. It is a question, and I think it's just going to take 2019 to answer that question. Is Georgia capable of cultivating a great receiver? Is someone going to outdistance even what Ridley and Hardman and Godwin did over the course of their UGA career? It's not enough yet to criticize and say Georgia needs to do more with these guys, but it is a question to answer in 2019, and I think it may be among Georgia's biggest. Jennifer Caldwell Sperlin says, I tried to watch a Tennessee hype video the other day. It was awful. Yeah, a lot of these hype videos leave some to be desired. I will tell you which non-Georgia team I think does the best hype videos. I think it's South Carolina. South Carolina has got a terrific video department. They hired, a fairly well-known video guy to do some of their stuff a couple years ago. I think that South Carolina does pretty good hype videos. I would agree with you that for the most part I haven't been that happy with Tennessee's. I kind of like Ole Miss's a little bit. Ole Miss will do some funny ones, and I don't mind a little humor every now and then. But if I'm going to watch a non-Georgia hype video, I think South Carolina probably does about the best job of that. Probably for sure. Luke Bird says, B.A., which do you think is more likely to happen? With everyone saying this could be Saban's last year. Tua leaves Alabama. UGA beats Alabama, wins the national championship. He goes on to say, Bama wins the national title and he leaves on top, putting Georgia on top to win it almost every single year. First of all, I like the idea there at the end. Here's what I think about the end of the Saban era. So I do think one way or another 2019 is going to be Tua's last year. I mean, I think that unless we see more performances from him against good defenses where he does not play quite as well, I think it's hard to imagine Tua not being thought of as a fairly high first-round draft pick. He's gone after that. I think it'll be very interesting to see what Saban thinks of his next crop of quarterbacks. As I said yesterday, I go out of my way not to say bad things about players. I'll rip on coaches all the time. I just try to, I try to treat the players a little bit differently, even the guys that don't play for Georgia. These are amateurs for the most part, after all, and whatever. There's plenty to talk about without ripping on players too much. That said, from my perspective, Paul Tyson, the grandson of Bear Bryant, or the great-grandson, either way, and Talia Tagovailoa, to his brother, I don't think they're the same caliber of prospect. In my mind, my opinion, I don't believe they're the same caliber of prospect that Tua Tagovailoa was. I think that Nick Saban, before he had Tua, did a lot of winning with less than elite quarterbacks, guys that are not playing in the NFL, guys that were little more than game managers. But he also had Lane Kiffin running his offense back then, and Kiffin was good at getting something out of those guys. I think once you've had an elite quarterback, I think it's very, very hard to go back and try to win the other way. Saban proved years ago that you could do that, but it's sort of like once you stay in a 5-star hotel or once you drive a fancy car with leather seats and a bunch of, 15 different speakers and all that kind of stuff. Like once you have a taste of the good life, boy, it is really, really hard to go back and live the other way. And I think from Saban's standpoint, if he looks at, and he'll see these guys in practice, if he looks at Talia, if he looks at Tyson, I guess Mac Jones will still have some eligibility. If he looks at these guys and say, boy, they are a long way from Tua Tagovailoa, I guess Jones will have 1 year of eligibility left. If he looks at these guys and say, boy, they're a long way from Tua Tagovailoa, then Saban's out. I don't think he's going to keep coaching Alabama without a great quarterback, because I think he's gotten too used to having a really good quarterback. And let's not forget, I don't think that Saban has always loved the pressure cooker that is Alabama. That job is not for everybody. Remember a couple years ago when the flirtation with Texas came up? My understanding about all of that was just Saban's way of telling Alabama fans, you better be careful and make sure you appreciate what you got. I could leave at any moment. I've got no shortage of job opportunities. I don't think that Saban really wanted to be the coach at Texas. I think he wanted Crimson Tide fans to think that he might be the coach at Texas, because I think he gets tired of the expectations of you got to win every single game and you got to do so in impressive fashion. Kirby Smart's going to live through some of that at Georgia too. All SEC fan bases for the most part are the same, but Saban's been doing this now for a while, and the nerves are probably even more frayed, knowing that even on the heels of losing a national championship game, that's for most programs a pretty good season. For Alabama, that won't be considered good enough. Given the pressure cooker that exists in Tuscaloosa, if he doesn't have a quarterback that projects to potentially be as good as Tua has been, I don't think Saban wants any part of that going forward.
Can I counter with something?
Please.
So, Saban coming from the Belichick tree, there's a lot of talk about, when Brady decides to hang it up, they think Belichick's going to keep going because he wants to prove that he can win it without Brady. Don't you think Saban also kind of wants to prove again that he doesn't need super elite, super talented quarterback to, still be the best team in college football?
So I think that's an interesting point. I guess, though, that Saban has proven that. I mean, they won a national championship with Jake Coker. I mean, Coker's a pretty good recruit, but not really a great quarterback. I mean, for the most part, the quarterbacks that Saban had pre-Tua, for the most part, they were all just kind of okay. Pretty good stats in college. I don't know that any of them, I guess McElroy played for a minute for the Jets, but really none of them had significant NFL careers.
Jim McCarron's still in the league.
Is he still playing in the league?
He started a playoff game.
The NFL league? Not the AAF. But even from that standpoint, that's not a. I don't think anybody thinks of A.J. McCarron as a great quarterback necessarily. Saban's won.
He was a great college quarterback.
He was quarterback at Alabama for sure.
38 touchdowns, 3 interceptions.
Yeah, but it's not the same thing as Tua Tagovailoa. A.J. McCarron's not winning.
It's not. A.J. McCarron was still a very good.
He's not winning the Heisman. A.J. McCarron's not winning the Heisman.
He's a Heisman finalist.
Well, be that as it may. You get in the college football playoff with Blake Sims. Blake Sims was a guy who had been in Alabama for a while, and some people weren't even sure he was going to play quarterback in Alabama. Using Lane Kiffin, you get the college football playoff with Blake Sims as quarterback. So Saban's actually already proven that. Belichick floated around the NFL for a while before he got to Tom Brady. And, we saw a little different version of Bill Belichick as the Browns coach pre-Tom Brady. So from that standpoint, if you want to really take this, down that road, I think Belichick's got more to prove in that regard. Saban's one with a lot of different quarterbacks, a lot of different kinds of players. Belichick's success has been with Tom Brady. So if there's a hole in the resume, it exists for Belichick in New England in a way that it does not exist for Saban in Alabama.
Belichick won 11 NFL games with Matt Castle.
That's true. Didn't make the playoffs that year, though.
He won 11 games. Saban never did that with anyone as his quarterback.
Playoffs.
Anyway, I do think that Saban wants to, there are a lot of people that maybe think, Tua's keeping Saban propped up and keeping Saban along, and I think Saban would kind of like to prove to people, hey, let's remember I'm the greatest college football coach of all time.
Yeah, so I understand where you're coming from. I don't think that's an invalid opinion. I think that's one of those things, especially late in life, and let's face it, he's been around for a while. I think late in life, I think it's just really hard to get used to comfort. How many times do you see an old guy driving down the road He's got his steering wheel wrapped in leather. He's got this like strap on the seat belt that has like the furry thing. So, I mean, old people like comfort. And I think that Saban's an older guy, and Tua Tagovailoa is a very comfortable situation at quarterback because he's very good and seemingly really easy to coach. So even if the fire ought to burn to say, let me prove I can win even without Tua Tagovailoa one more time. Let me go to the NFL one more time and show that the 8-8 seasons in Miami were a fluke. I think the later that you get in life, I think the more easy it is just to get addicted to comfort.
I mean, I see your point, but, Saban is who Saban is. I don't think he's changed all that much just because he just happens to have a generational or a very, very good quarterback prospect at his disposal. I mean, say what you want, but this Alabama team as a whole was not as good this year, playing sort of that, up-tempo spread. We're going to spread it out. We're going to throw the ball around 4 wide receiver sets.
Yeah, I mean, it'll certainly be very interesting to see. Georgia Peach in the YouTube comment section talking about Dwan Mathis, that he's a mature guy. I like his attitude. Yeah, I like the attitude from Mathis a lot. And I talked before about he kind of gives you both sides of the coin. He gives you the confidence. He gives you the humility. That's a pretty good combination to have. I mean, I do think that Mathis has got some things to prove as a player. I think that there's no doubt that he can run. There's no doubt that his kind of a long, tall frame, I think that helps him. But he's going to have to prove that he can throw the football, and he's going to be given every chance to do that. Now, by throwing, I mean, he's obviously got a strong arm. I'm talking about he's going to have to prove that he can handle that part of it. Work on the mechanics, get that part of it down, elevate that level of his play, and he's going to get every chance to do that. But Mathis is a pretty interesting prospect for Georgia to look at for sure. Also, somebody else in the YouTube comment section a moment ago had a comment that I want to mention. K9 Blues, in the comparison with Georgia and Alabama, that the way to beat Alabama is to have the same caliber of athletes. We just now have that. And I think he's right. It's taken Georgia, even though the 2017 class at the time was the best class that Georgia had signed, 2018 class was even better than that, 2019 class right there in that same conversation. Georgia's been recruiting at an unprecedented level by its own standard for the last 3 years. But even with that level of recruiting success, it's only now just met Alabama. It's only now created sort of a sense of a fair fight, and that is the way that you beat Alabama. I think K9's right about that. And that is the other thing that I think that Nick Saban could potentially deal with. That coaching the SEC is a lot more fun when you have a lot more talent than everybody else does. But in head-to-head matchups against Georgia, that's no longer going to be the case. It's going to be a fair fight, and guess what? You won't always win every fair fight. And you got an issue to your west if you're Nick Saban too, where Jimbo Fisher is going to try to build up and do the same things. And in some cases, Georgia and Texas A&M are not necessarily going to be going after a lot of the same recruits. Some cases they will. Zachary Evans, probably an example of that. But there's enough elite players, especially given the state of Texas, that Georgia and Texas A&M won't always be going head-to-head. So if you've got Jimbo Fisher, who finished top 5 this year, if he starts putting together elite classes as well, all of a sudden that's another program of, now I don't have this huge talent advantage over Texas A&M anymore. It's going to take them a few years to do that, but if that continues, that's something for Saban to deal with. Not to mention, after a brief hiatus, LSU's back getting its share of guys from Louisiana. Saban still swooped in there and got a couple this year, but LSU's back on the scene. That's another thing that I think can make Saban not enjoy the SEC quite as much anymore. He had a good little run there for a few years, where no one was recruiting anywhere close to the same level as Alabama was in the league. After the Les Miles kind of fell off at LSU, there was that gap where Saban really distanced himself from a recruiting standpoint. But Jimbo and Kirby, and to a certain extent Orgeron, they are making that a lot harder to do. Not to mention programs like Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee, which are trying to steal the Saban staffers. And it's not always assistant coaches. It's those analysts and things like that. How many times have you heard, so-and-so analyst has gone to work for Tennessee? I think it's happened a couple times in the last couple of weeks. So the status for Saban in the SEC, he's the unquestioned top of the league and has been. He deserves credit for that. But this league, from his perspective, is about to get a lot harder because you got some programs who are recruiting better, and life without Tua Tagovailoa is not going to necessarily be a ton of fun if I had to guess.
Talking a bit too much about Bama here, but getting it back to Georgia, Rodney Hewitt I think brings up an interesting question regarding Dwan Mathis. shouldn't he get more game reps this year if he's possibly going to be the starter in 20?
So I have no fear whatsoever about burning his red shirt. If you had a chance to play Dwan Mathis, if Dwan, I've said this before, if Mathis can beat out Bennett head-to-head to be the primary backup, then I'd have no problem playing him, given the fact that Georgia's probably going to be winning a lot of games by a fairly significant margin. Get a chance to play him in 7 or 8 games this season. I have no problem doing that whatsoever. And let the chips fall where it may for 2020, 2021 in terms of him beating out Carson Beck or whatever. But if he's good enough to be the primary backup right now, red shirt's not a consideration for me. I'm not going to just give that backup job to Bennett because I don't want to. I don't want to burn Mathis. I want to save him for later. I got no issue using a year of eligibility on Mathis if he's capable of beating out Bennett. Just given the fact that Bennett knows the offense, and quarterback gurus might tell us that Mathis has got some stuff to work on. For instance, he didn't make the Elite 11, right? Nope. Now that's not. There are plenty of guys who have made the Elite 11 have done bupkis in college. So that's not necessarily the end-all, be-all, but that would give you an idea that he's got some stuff to work on. So beating out Bennett's not going to be easy for Mathis to do necessarily for all the reasons that I just mentioned. But if he can do that, get him in the game. Play him as a backup. Let him learn and grow. And it could be that you treat it differently, whereas if it's a traditional backup situation because Georgia's up 31-3, then Mathis comes in. If it's Jake Fromm gets his bell rung on one play in the third quarter, and all of a sudden now you're making a more pressure-packed throw, or you're in the game in a more pressure-packed situation, then maybe at that point in time Bennett gets that. So maybe that's the way that you treat it. But the overall take is I had no problem burning Bennett's. I have no problem burning Mathis's red shirt whatsoever.
Yeah, I think Georgia does, and I wrote about this morning. Georgia does have to consider, 2020 might be life without Jake Fromm.
Yeah.
Mathis could be a guy that starts for them. Carson Beck could be a guy that starts for them. Kirby showed he has no problem playing guys who don't have a ton of experience. Jacob Eason and Jake Fromm both started 10-plus games their freshman year. Justin Fields played significant snaps in 12 of the 14 games last year, and really 12 of the 13 because there was no way he was ever going to play in that Tech game.
Yeah.
So, Kirby, I think he's going to do what's best. And if he thinks that, Mathis is a guy who one day will be the starting quarterback for Georgia, I think it would make a lot of sense when Georgia gets into those mop-up duty type situations to just go ahead and put Mathis out there.
Yeah, we had somebody in our comment section a couple of weeks ago or a few days ago said that he thought that what was the prediction that Mathis would have, I don't know, 3 touchdowns through 4 games or something along those lines.
I don't know if it was Mathis, but
I want to say I thought it was. Either way, if he's the kind of guy that's capable of throwing a touchdown in a college game, even if it's in late game kind of mop-up duty, at that point in time, he's probably got enough athleticism to beat out Bennett. Obviously, I know what the Georgia players think about Bennett, and that matters to me a lot, but there's no doubt that just by spec, the better skill set belongs to Mathis. What remains to be seen, though, is how Mathis, even with a year in college, would compare to a guy like Carson Beck, who I think overall is just a better overall prospect. Matt Rukavina is checking in from Alaska, by the way, in Anchorage, Alaska right now. Matt checking in. Matt, we appreciate you doing that. Thank you so much. That's a really cool thing to have you checking in, Matt. That's cool. Jess Anderson says, can Fromm improve in the pocket as far as moving around? Well, Trent Dilfer says that you can do that. We played that audio earlier this week from our conversation with Dilfer back in very early February about improving your athleticism and just moving around the pocket, not necessarily becoming a running quarterback, but just keeping plays alive longer with your legs and showing an ability to do that. He says you can improve in that athleticism. There's some things that seemingly quarterbacks can't improve on. Mike Leach, the Washington State coach, told us recently that accuracy is one of those. Dilfer doesn't seem to think that improving as an athlete is necessarily that big of a deal, that footwork might be one of those things that you could work on. So I guess from that standpoint, a guy that knows this position pretty well, Connor, says that athleticism is something that you can improve upon.
Yeah, I don't want to keep bringing up Tom Brady, but that is something over the course of his career. While he's not the take-off dual-threat guy, he has greatly improved the way he is able to move and navigate around the pocket. And that's something where, you'd certainly like to see Fromm do a little bit better. And I think this year he took a lot of sacks because he was just simply holding on to the ball a little bit too long, waiting for a play to develop. So hopefully, under James Coley, it's a little bit more of a quicker rhythm offense, which I think would better suit Fromm's skill set. But his pocket play, that's where Fromm's going to make his money. That's where, if he's going to be a first-round pick a year from now, it's because he is a very, very elite level pocket passer.
Yeah, one of the things that I thought that Tua did a year ago better than Fromm did was throw to all fields. I really want to see Fromm. A lot of these websites will put out those kind of like heat charts of, here's how much he threw to this quadrant and this quadrant and this quadrant and this quadrant. I think if you looked at Jake Fromm, I think you see some heavy imbalances on one side or another. I'd love to see him spread the football. Use the middle of the field more. Use deep left, deep right. Show me all of that quadrant. Kind of like that heat map of don't have a favorite spot quite as much. Not only is that going to make him, I think, better looking at NFL scouts, but I think it's going to make the Georgia offense a lot more dangerous as well.
I would agree with that. My one trepidation is just there are a lot of questions about Georgia wide receivers right now, and it's they do have options, but Jeremiah Holloman is really the only proven Georgia wide receiver this year, and it is going to be interesting, especially early on in the season. That Vanderbilt game, that Notre Dame game, to see which sort of wide receivers step up, because I think that if a Dominic Blaylock emerges, if a George Pickens emerges like we think they will, it's certainly going to make Fromm's possibility of throwing to all fields a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point. James Crump, this is kind of a negative thing, but it's a point worth considering. I think it's a very interesting thing to bring up. He says, given the lack of depth behind Jake Fromm, that he thinks teams will be more motivated to go after Jake Fromm. And obviously, the rules go out of their way to protect the quarterback, especially in the NFL level, but in the college level as well. We've seen some of the physicality kind of taken out there. But there's no doubt, seemingly an incentive to get to Georgia's backup quarterback. Connor, do you think that causes defenses to want to go after Fromm a little bit more? Not dirty play even necessarily, just being more aggressive, knowing there's a lot to be gained if you can get Fromm out of the game.
I don't think that's the case. We did see at Georgia and teams later on in the season this year, Mississippi State, LSU, go after Tua more, but I think that was more just because of an injury. Like he's clearly prone to injuries. That's not the case.
Yeah, I think the thing with Tua late in the season, you mentioned Mississippi State, LSU, and even Georgia. I think they were going after him because he was easier to get to.
Yes, because he was easy to hit.
Yeah,
and if
he just was not. He wasn't as mobile as he was at one point in time.
Fromm doesn't take those type of hits as a quarterback.
Yeah, and
I think with him, the issue was he was just holding on to the ball a long time, and I think if he trying to make a play, there are some coaches who tell you there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. But I think this year under Coley, I think given what he did at Miami, I think we're going to maybe see, an offense that moves a little bit quicker. If a play's not there, just throw it out of bounds. Georgia doesn't need him to take the hit. So while I do think teams may try and bring more pressure, I don't know how much you can do that against an offensive line as good as Georgia's.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think one of the things that Fromm does pretty well, it kind of reminds me of the quarterbacks that were good when I was growing up in the decade of the 80s. Back then, a lot of those NFL quarterbacks were really good when they felt pressure. They stepped into the pocket to make the throw. Fromm's really good at that. It's one of the reasons why he's had some issues with, I think, blitz pressure or pass rushing that comes straight at him from up the middle. That can be a little bit of an issue because I do think he likes stepping into the pocket, and I think he's shown a really good ability to do that, which does, for the most part, kind of keep you out of harm's way. All right, we got to get ready to go.
Marion Martin Corbin brings up Jake played well this past year, and hurry up, wish we had done that more. I do think that is something you might see sprinkled into the Georgia offense this year a little bit more, just to sort of better suit Fromm's skill set.
Yeah, Miriam, I think that's a really good point. I'm like you. I've noticed that you can see these, especially moments at the end of first halves. Georgia's always moving the football and seemingly doing it with ease. The only assumption I can make is that Kirby Smart thinks that over the course of a full drive, full game, more than just a 2-minute situation, he's going to tire down his offensive lineman. That's the only that's got to be the issue there, right, Connor? And we saw. To go back to Lane Kiffin, I think Kiffin's a really good play caller. We saw him 2014, 2015, 2016. He did a pretty good job of balancing big offensive linemen, running the football, and spread. Go watch the 2015 season, for instance. Derrick Henry wins the Heisman Trophy at Alabama, and they were still playing fairly fast a pretty good bit. They weren't really sacrificing a whole lot on that. But my assumption of why Georgia doesn't do hurry up more, even though Fromm is good at it, and when they do it, they seem to have success, I don't think they want to wear down those offensive linemen and somehow get in a situation where you're fatigued and you're trying to move the football, because it's all, SEC defensive linemen are so athletic as it is that the last thing you want is a tired offensive lineman trying to block think about Quinnen Williams a year ago, or what Jeffrey Simmons or Montez Sweat would have been a year ago. Think about trying to block those guys when you're also fatigued. I'm guessing, for better or for worse, that's probably Kirby Smart's concern on that point.
Right. It's the whole Big 12 defense chicken and egg thing. Is it just that Big 12 defenses are bad, or is it because they're bad because their numbers are bad because they're consistently going against offenses that go up tempo and sort of wear them out because they don't have the depth to match up with that. Whereas in the SEC, the reason you don't see that is because the Alabamas, LSUs, Georgias, Auburns of the world, they have the depth on the defensive line to where you don't want to tire out your own offense going up tempo all the time.
Chad Williams on Facebook says, everybody needs to send me $100. I can get you on top band status. You can also get your child into Stanford, so check him out for that there as well. Hashim Spike says all quarterbacks have problems with pressure up the middle, and that's probably true from Hashim. That's probably a fair point. Anything else we want to mention here? Dan Riggin says Fromm plays similar to Zaire. Yeah, a little bit. I'll continue to say that Eric Zaire, I think, as time passes, I think people forget just how good of a quarterback Eric Zaire really was. You can look how his stats still compare even to modern quarterbacks. You get a sense that Zaire was a very good player at that position. Very good player. G. Grace, who's an Alabama fan, says Fromm's a good quarterback. He plays to his strengths. He's not the problem. Georgia's defense is the problem. And by problem, I think Grace must mean to the tune of winning a national championship. And definitely one of the things you do want to see from this Georgia defense in 2019, can it fill out those missing pieces to go from being a very good defense? Georgia's been statistically top 20, top 15 over the last couple of years. Can it now become a truly great defense? That's going to be one of the things that's a really important question for this season for sure. Crow King 123 on that same line says interior defense still worries me. Yeah, Georgia's got to find somebody else besides Jordan Davis. Jordan Davis is a really good player, and assuming that his weight's not going to be an issue that Kirby Smart suggested a few days ago, as much fun as it is to watch him stop that run in the middle, Georgia does have to have more than just that. So that is a very fair point. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Huge thanks to all of you for making the R.S. Andrews Cool Down so much fun on our program each and every day. And don't forget to check out R.S. Andrews on the web at rsandrews.com. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical, they'll take care of all of it for you. They're the ones we trust to play all the positions around DawgNation. We will look forward to seeing them and you back here tomorrow for 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily Live. And after that, plenty of comments as part of the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. You have a great day. Don't forget to see this afternoon, too, 3 p.m. Eastern Time for Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. So we're busy today around DawgNation, and we'll enjoy sharing it all with you, including back here tomorrow morning for DawgNation Daily Live. Have a great day, everybody.